Anyway, so you know, I thought today let's just have fun. It's kind of late in the semester, and this is a great excuse to play games with each other. And don't be afraid if you're not a self-identified gamer. I think that's actually healthy. But today I'm focusing on using games during class, and this is opposed to assigning it as homework, though I often actually do assign games as homework, and then after they've had a chance to play them at home. Sometimes it's great if you're doing something a little bit more sophisticated, like an alternate reality game, to actually assign something way ahead of time and have them participate over time. And I've also actually held class in a massively multiplayer online world. World of Warcraft is actually what I played for many years. I have to admit this now. And so I've actually held class in World of Warcraft, which is actually really difficult to do the way that they set up trial accounts. They really disable a lot of the functionality of the game if you're just using a free account. So it makes it hard to shepherd, but it's always fun because your class is there as level 1 avatars, newbies basically, right? And so you have to kind of shelter them. And I had one student that kept getting, you know, killed by woolly spiders, and you know, because she strayed off the path. And so you have to, you know, it's interesting to kind of interact at that level, and they think it's a lot of fun. But we'll focus on in-class playing today. And so close playing, this might rile up some of the English folk that are in here because close reading is sort of a, you know, it's part and parcel of what we do, but it's also not all that we do in any way, but it's a recognizable way to think about what you can do with games. And so I thought, you know, why don't I start with a little bit of the statistics? And I actually pulled this slide from the Entertainment Software Association, which is an industry lobbying group. So you have to take the data with a big grain of salt, right? But it says here, and this is hard to read, so I'll read it to you, but 59% of Americans play video games. Consumers spent $21.53 billion on video games, hardware, and accessories in 2013. The average game player is 31 years old and has been playing games for 14 years. And the average age of the most frequent game purchaser is 35 years old. And now I'm going to mess up Google Hangouts because I wanted to just briefly show something. But the Pew Internet and American Life survey has been very useful for collecting data about games and gamers. They had one study that came out in 2008. Sorry, I should share this. Where is my window for that? Here we go. So do I stop, or I just switch the feed, right, Anna? Okay. Okay. Okay, so this study, as well as another they did about adults that game, actually reported that fully 97% of teens, 12 to 17, and this was in 2008, play games, right, even if they don't identify as gamers. But at the same time, only about 31% of parents actually report playing games with their kids. And so I find it very interesting because we have this weird gap of literacy and a generational gap in the willingness to engage with this medium that all young people use, even if they don't profess, you know, undying love for games. So I find that, you know, exposing them to games in class engages not only the people who don't play games regularly, but also the people who've played games all their lives but never really thought critically about what that means. So now I have to go back. Sorry about this. And by the way, the findings about civic participation where quantity of gameplay didn't really correlate with increased civic participation, but certain types of gameplay and behavior surrounding games did correlate very strongly. So if you were the type of gamer that spent extra time outside of the game, commenting on message boards or participating in forums and sort of being part of that game community, you were also more likely to be active in your community in the way that they define these things. So I find that interesting as well. Okay, so let's kind of go down the list of the greats in terms of what you can do with games and what kinds of analysis you can conduct. So one that occurs immediately would be visual, on the visual level. So early game scholarship often derived from film scholarship. And there are certain games that really cry out for this kind of analysis. And so the screenshot I have is from LA Noire because it's clearly referencing a genre of film and also a period of history in its tropes. There's also narrative analysis, and game studies very famously at the very start in the 90s was divided between these two camps, and it's kind of like the Jets and the Sharks, but it was the ludologists and the narratologists, and ended up being kind of a false binary, but the people who were really invested in seeing games as just an extension of earlier storytelling media were the narratologists. And then there were the people who really wanted to carve out a distinctive space for games and to interpret games in a way that wasn't derivative. It wasn't using film analysis or wasn't using narrative analysis to look at games, but to think about games in terms of their mechanics or in terms of computation. And that debate has largely been eroded, and people have acknowledged that both sides are important, which is good. The one that I tend to use a lot is what Ian Bogost calls procedural rhetoric, or extending the idea of rhetoric from classical rhetoric, which is spoken or written rhetoric or visual rhetoric even, to what he calls procedural rhetoric, which is computationally based arguments. So he sees games as persuasive objects. And Alex Galloway has also written something about how in our daily lives, we're kind of surrounded with an algorithmic culture, and games are sort of the embodiment of that, and not necessarily in a good way, right? And Bogost has a great example that almost all of my students have encountered, and so we often look at this one. And so it's Animal Crossing for the Nintendo. And he actually writes about it because I think his then 5-year-old son or something was playing this game, and it seems like a very wholesome and like a good way to spend your time as a kid, right? But when he was paying closer attention to the game, he really discovered that it's a kind of a parable of capitalism, and also how to kind of mortgage yourself out of reason, right? So there's this kind of shady looking raccoon character down here on the edge named Tom Nook, and he's sort of the town tradesman, or the person that you go to buy and sell things with. And so the game is all about sort of completing tasks like hunting and foraging, and then kind of building up your wealth. They don't say dollars, they say bells, but it's essentially wealth. And then buying nicer and nicer things and upgrading your home and making your home nicer and nicer. But the kind of eerie thing is that as you're incrementally increasing the luxury of your home, Tom Nook's house and business becomes much more luxurious in proportion to what you're doing. So it's this bizarre kind of fable of capitalism. And so it's this fun kind of thing where when I'm teaching games to my students, I often warn them that I'm about to destroy your childhood, because they have this very, often if they are self-identified as gamers, they feel very protective toward the things that they've been playing for years, and often associate series like Zelda or Mario or something with, there's a deep nostalgia quotient. And then, so I have to say that I'm going to rip that screen away and think about these implicit or sometimes explicit things that games say about the way that the world should work, or how things should operate. And so another thing that you can look at is this idea that games embody a kind of informatic control, and that's what Galloway says. So he basically says, and he loves games, he says that games teach you how to be really good micromanagers, and basically, and the game that comes up here is Diner Dash, and I've spent way too much of my life playing this game, and it's, seat and serve your way to the top, which is kind of depressing if you think about it, right? But it's this heroic, you play as a waitress, right, who kind of claws her way to the top and ends up establishing a business. But it's all about time management and about micromanagement of small tasks. And so in a way, it's training to be an excellent bureaucrat, or pencil pusher. And finally, another kind of fun thing to do is to think about what Galloway calls countergaming, which is what a lot of gamers do, is to use the game in a way that it wasn't intended to be used. So it's the people that like to find Easter eggs in the games, or break them, like find ways to break them. Or the example my students always use is in The Sims, which a lot of people have played. You can play The Sims as it was intended, to be take care of them and attend to their needs and fulfill their desires. Or you can trap them in a pool with no ladder and they'll drown to death. Or you can, wait till they really have to go to the bathroom, take the door to the bathroom away, right? So it's like, it's playing the game in a sort of sadistic way, but they find that very entertaining.
More credit, something like that.
Yeah, cheat codes, right?
Yeah.
And I think, there's, Mary Flanagan had a book about cheating, and I think, she kind of argues that cheating is part of games, right?
Yeah.
Modding, I think, right, would maybe count, or cheat codes. The one example I've shown recently is actually using America's Army, which is a really state-of-the-art first-person shooter game that the American military actually uses as a recruitment tool. And I don't know if you've ever seen this Army Experience Center that they opened in Philadelphia, but it's part of a mall. So it's 20,000 square feet with 30 Xbox consoles and realistic Humvees with like fake guns so you can shoot, and an Army recruiter just happens to be nearby if you feel incentivized to kind of enlist, right? And it's between a Banana Republic and a Victoria's Secret. It's just really, it's a fascinating, kind of cultural melange. But you can actually download America's Army and play it and go through that scenario. But then I also show them, there's an artist, Joe DeLapp, who actually did a performance piece a few years ago called Dead in Iraq, where his name was Dead in Iraq. And so he would enter the game, throw down his weapon immediately, right? And then he would just proceed to type the names of American servicemen and women who've been killed in combat. And it's hard for you to see here, but basically people get very angry because he's not playing the game as it was intended to be played. He's almost always shot very quickly because he stands in the middle of the passageway without defending himself. And then people start ranting and raving at him for not kind of playing. He's being a spoil sport, right? And they question, why are you doing this? So those are some of the methods. And I thought what we could do is actually, I wanted to make this fun for you and for me. And so I brought in my PlayStation 3. And I have my laptop and I have some games, and I thought we could maybe try some close playing. And what I do is I offer my students simple, sometimes extremely unsubtle and very polemical games. So they kind of run the spectrum between extremely unsubtle and very subtle. So let me share now something else. Oh, Google Hangouts, okay. This one. And maybe, I apologize, I know a lot of you in here, and I feel like you've probably seen these games before. But on the extreme unsubtle side of the spectrum, I often teach PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. They have a version of Nintendo's Cooking Mama game, which if you've ever played Cooking Mama, it's a very kind of sanitized, it's a lot like our Food Network, right? But it's very sanitized cooking, and it's a very cutesy aesthetic. She's got the bandana and she just kind of, it's teaching you to cook. But does anyone want to try this out? Oh, I don't know if the sound is actually coming through the HDMI for this. Oh, you know what? This is probably just not too good. Oh. Yeah. Do I need to do something for that? Because it should be through HDMI, right? It's not a big deal. It's actually pretty grisly sound, so. Oh, I see. I see. For output. Audio for output. It's gonna be really loud though. Yeah, it gets kind of gory, so we might want to. Here's my output. Sound, manage audio. Here we go. I don't have to restart to do that. sorry, I guess you should have tested this earlier. I thought I switched it. Oh, no, it's, okay.
Double click on that. There you go.
I guess I
Okay.
didn't set it. I just clicked OK.
Okay.
All right. I know the other one is. It's okay. We can just, oh, maybe I muted it. Oh, it's on,
Unmuted.
yeah. Or it came out muted. Sorry. Unmute. It's not an option.
All right.
That's so bizarre. This is part of teaching with games in the classroom. Unexpected technical difficulties. Okay. I don't know. That's odd. Okay.
If you can go back to your regular audio system though, because I think the Google Hangouts might not pick up on your audio.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I forgot to test that.
It may only work if you were plugged in directly to this.
Oh,
Although
okay.
you'd think it should connect because this is all HDMI.
Yeah, that's odd. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it should be back.
Okay.
Oops. I know it's doing odd things. Okay. No, I'm not getting anything. Ugh. Sorry. My mouse is also not that great. Here we go. Okay. Well, let's just try it as is. Would anybody like to cook with Cooking Mama? This one's a fairly simple game, I think. I'm gonna. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dave. All right.
Okay.
So you,
Just a mouse.
Yep. And so sort of our job is to kind of observe what's happening and comment. And I think in some of the later games you can also fill out assisted advice. Yeah. All right, so you're now preparing things to be done.
Yeah. I don't think I'm doing very well. I think
It's hard, I'm
the
sorry.
turkey's covered in feathers. No, I don't want to pluck the hook. Yeah. Oh. No. Yeah.
So now we have to this Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you need to like grab and hold.
Okay.
So be glad this happened.
Yeah. My arm is frighteningly long.
I don't even know what that is actually.
Oh, what's that? Oh, yeah, because it's got the blue part.
All right. Thank you
All
so
right.
much
Wow.
for volunteering. That was
My
great. So this is on the very sort of polemical end of the spectrum, where I think, you know, if they're having trouble discovering a message hidden within video games, there's no problem usually here, right? PETA is not known for its great subtlety. Other games that I often show them, has anybody ever heard of Mole Industria? Or, well, I know, Kim, that you've used the McDonald's video game.
Right, I actually did it today.
Oh, great, wonderful. So one of the ones that's very fun to do is their anti-adver game, which is called the McDonald's game. And another one that I often do is Every Day the Same Dream, which, if you can see, I don't know if you can see, it's a game about alienation and refusal of labor. So these are not your ordinary kind of flash games. So they're created by Paolo Pedercini, and so it's sort of an Italian art collective that makes these little games. Some of them, I mean, they're not always very tactful games, but they make interesting arguments. Phone Story is another one that I've used. But, you know, McDonald's, why not? Why don't we try it? Just because everybody recognizes this brand. And I will just demo this one for you. But so I usually will assign this game, and I won't give too much context because I want them to discover it for themselves. And this is a game where it's actually very hard to succeed, and students are programmed to sort of automatically want to win and to succeed. But in order to win in this game, you have to actually make very unethical decisions. So you have 4 windows. There's the agriculture window. This is, I think, in Brazil. So you have to raise cows and soybeans. But you can tell that at some point you will run out of space. So your options become, do I bribe the mayor of Sao Paulo, or do I raise the rainforest, or the indigenous settlement? You have the kind of beef production window. So these cows are healthy, but sometimes you'll get sick ones, and you have to make the decision whether or not to end them, and then also whether or not to put them back into the food supply, because on this end, you have demand from your store. So you have to hire workers to work the cashier and the line. And I always know if my students have actually played this with an attention to detail, right? Because I ask them, have you seen these guys do anything kind of odd? And if you watch long enough, they will stop smiling and they will start to spit in the food occasionally. But it only happens maybe once every 2 or 3 minutes, right? So you actually have to really be observing to see. And then you, as the officer, or sorry, the manager, you have the choice of whether to reprimand them, give them a employee of the month badge, or fire them. And then here's corporate marketing. And my students always point out that it's very bizarre because the corporate boardroom has no door. It's like they're locked in there. But my favorite is that the creatives have these mohawks, but they're still part of the machine. But here you can decide to bribe lobbyists or to start marketing campaigns. Like, what are some of the options? So the creatives allow you to do McDonald's for the third world. Children want McDonald's, McDisney's, and the food pyramid, right? And there's this very creepy, sinister McDonald's, but it costs money. So anytime you see the flashing, there's a problem. So here's a sick cow. Uh-oh, well, too late. That decision was taken out of my hands. Yeah, so it's getting outputted as burgers right now. But now we don't have any cows, we need more cows. So anyway, they go through this process of trying to manage this game, and eventually almost all of them end up in bankruptcy. So the game ends at, I think, negative $40,000. So most of the time they end up in bankruptcy, and that's like the ideal state that I want them to be at. And occasionally I get a student who does really well at this game. And I think, wow, what was going on here? They're just very good at playing games, most likely. I don't know. The News Gaming site is another one that's kind of interesting as well. And these are games that are supposed to simulate like editorial cartoons. So they have a little bit of a punch. The one that I often use is September 12th, which was a commentary about the kind of war on terror. And it's a very simple mechanic. It actually says that it's not a game and it's more of a simulation. But as this is loading, this one has a very simple mechanic and it's easy to sort of think about what's going on here. Okay. Okay, so the instructions say this is not a game, you can't win and you can't lose. All you get is this information that these folks are terrorists and these are civilians. Does anybody want to try this? This is one of those weird things where it's like you get put in an awkward position because it's a dubious game, right? But you want to try? Anybody? Emmanuel, you're a pro gamer. I know you
I'm
are.
not a gamer for sure. I like games. Okay.
I know you're good at this.
We both love from dust.
You're going to be surprised.
There's really only one thing you can do.
You know, I have to tell you, I was so bad when I started to be interested by games, to be honest, many years ago, that I decided to buy an Xbox 360 because at least I could play. On computer, I was very bad. So I'm
You're
supposed.
actually, most young people play on consoles.
Okay,
rather
yeah. I see what you mean.
Or on mobiles.
Yeah.
So
I need to kill the bad guys.
that's all you have is is a bullseye.
They're gonna have a lot of questions for sure.
Right, so we've already happened on one of the core logics.
So you got the idea, yeah.
Consequences are inevitable, collateral damage is inevitable.
Ah, yeah.
But maybe these folks,
Bad.
if you can watch what's happening, what happens after?
So no commentaries. But obviously, you missed a lot of things.
So there's already a point about position, right?
Yeah. Actually. Oh,
See, what happens though? People run to the scene.
one guy around
Those
here.
are civilians.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well,
Seeing this, it's hard to
Oh,
see.
yeah, they're becoming terrorists.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
this is basically maybe for things that happen in this game.
oh, I see what you mean. Yes,
So these
very
people that are
interesting.
being at the site become terrorists.
Yeah.
The position is relatively bad.
Oh, right, that's right. Then that's everybody turns into it.
That's collateral.
Yeah.
Now, I think another interesting thing though, you can choose not to do anything, right? And
Okay.
this game has what I would call steady states. Used to operate with not doing anything. And if you leave it long enough, the so-called terrorists will actually do civilians. And they will rebuild the damage. So eventually it will all be rebuilt and they'll convert to a civilian populace. So it's a very, it's a very simple simulation.
But
an
very interesting. Oh, yeah.
right?
Truly, thank you.
You got him. Okay, so and then you can also use Congregate, which is a site with a lot of free games. I sometimes show something much more subtle. So a lot of those were very overt and politically motivated, but there's this game called Take a Walk on Congregate that I sometimes use.
Speaking of wars, since I played this game, I just wanted to tell you that I discovered a game recently made by this. It's about the same topic, but it was this year I told you about that.
Right.
It was a game about World War I between the French and the Germans. And for the celebration of the end of this war, Ubisoft made this game called Violent Art. And it's a very good game. It's about the war itself, but it's about the friendship between one father-in-law who's French and one son-in-law who's German,
Oh,
and they're gonna fight together,
okay.
not against, and they're gonna find a way to stay together. And it's truly a very interesting, I will say, reflection about the war and about peace. In that, because
That's
it's all about
great.
peace.
I'll have to get the title. There are other actually in the Journal of Digital Humanities, there was a special section on games and historical narratives. So that would fall under that, but also something like Valkyria Chronicles, which is basically recapping World War I, but in a sort of fictional universe. But this is a simpler game where you're this sort of office drone, and there's this mournful music, and so, you know, having to figure out what's happening here. And so using games that only have a few kind of parameters helps. So, you know, you run into an obstacle and the music stops. But if you continue on and don't have any interruptions, the music continues. And then you get, you know, one of the things I often ask is, what is being measured? So I don't know if you can see, but can you guys see what the criteria are for measurement in this game? Yohei, you're the closest. Yeah, yeah. There's a score, right? Yep, and birds. And so it's a simple thing, but it's, you know, how do you get birds? How do you get a score? And then how do those kind of go away? So it turns out in order to get the score, you need to get these musical notes, right? And I'm playing badly because it's laggy. But if you maintain a flow state and you don't at any point run into an obstacle, you get a bird that flutters down and sort of accompanies you on your walk. And then more and more will come, and as soon as you hit an obstacle, they'll fly away. So it's a weird sort of commentary on achieving flow and escaping from your cubicle. So much more subtle message than some of these other games. I will save my PS3 game maybe for the end. So very quickly, let me just show you a few of the academic sites that you might also want to use. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so there are a number of very great programs that are doing work on game design and game analysis. One of them that I would mention is at UC Santa Cruz. There's a Center for Games and Playable Media. And they have an excellent game library and a game design major. And they actually recently established a new department of computational media, which is one of the first of its kind probably in the country. But they have folks like Warren Sack and Noah Wardrop-Fruin and Michael Mateus. And they're known for what they call expressive processing, and probably their most famous initial game was a game called Facade. Has anybody ever tried Facade before? It's the premise. What's that?
It's a movie.
Oh, it's well, this one in particular was more of a social simulation.
Okay.
You're basically playing a guest who's invited to a dinner party, and you go into this apartment, and the couple is kind of having some marital strife. And it's just a game about negotiating this universe, and representing. The game is about sort of representing and dealing with emotion. So they have a very interesting center there. Another one that's very nearby is at Dartmouth. So the Tilt Factor Lab that's run by Dr. Mary Flanagan and operates under this principle of critical play, which is what she has written her book about. Has an entire series of games, and since this is a digital humanities crowd, their games under metadata games are games all about using games to enhance the metadata for curatorial objects. So they have a partnership with the British Library. And so you get games like Stupid Robot, where the robot is just, it plays dumb. It says, human, what is in this picture? Please tell me, right? Give me a 3-letter word, a 4-letter word, a 5-letter word, a 6-letter word to describe what you see in this, right? And I guess the idea is to kind of crowdsource help in tagging images, right, and making them legible. Though I tried this recently with some of my grad students, they felt really intimidated because a lot of those images are difficult to decode, and they felt a great responsibility to tag correctly, right? And then I just briefly, I forgot to mention at University of Chicago, my colleague Pat Jagoda also has a new lab called the Game Changer Lab, which develops games. USC has a very famous program. So they're kind of popping up all over the place. And MIT has scats of stuff. But you can use games to teach many different kinds of approaches. And one that's been very successful is the cultural studies approach, where you're looking at race, gender, sexuality, representation, history, as I just mentioned, the Jeremy Antley section in Journal of Digital Humanities. You can also teach games as textual objects. If you're being a little bit more freeform, you can look at them as you would, in other areas of literary scholarship. You could apply a lot of those principles. And one area that I would just mention is critical code studies, where there's a kind of small group led by Mark Marino that's trying to actually look at games less as black boxes, where you don't know how things are operating inside, but actually as white boxes, and getting access to some of that code and looking at it. And some of it, you don't even really need to know how to program. You can look at a variable name and see that it's suspicious, right? Or you can look at the coder's documentation, which is just, plain language expression of what they want to accomplish. And I give them this example of the game Dead Island, which is like a zombie pirate title that I've never played. But there was a big scandal about that, where one of the coders named one of the characters feminist whore Perna, because and the thing is, in the game she does extra damage against men, and she's supposed to be a strong female character, but you wouldn't know unless you kind of went into the code level that there was this kind of labeling of that character. And then there is recently this push toward having serious games, or games that are alternate reality games that overlay your real life with a game-like narrative. And I actually had my students try this, and they all claimed that they couldn't do this because they lived in singles. But Chore Wars is one of them, where you're supposed to basically model your housework as a Dungeons and Dragons style adventure. So rather than, begging your spouse to clean the toilet for the 17th time, you create a quest to slay the porcelain dragon. It's worth 100 XP, which is like 5 times all the other tasks. And you're supposed to enroll your housemates in this process. And the big proselytizer on this front is Jane McGonigal, who has this book about how reality is kind of broken and in many ways not very good at giving real-time feedback to students and to people about how they're doing, and providing information at the right time, and also providing incentive and reward, right? So her idea is that we need to take some game mechanics and port them to real life. And so in my classes, we often have this debate about, is that just malarkey, right? Or is there some sort of value in that? And what does it mean to have a game in the first place? And then just to finish, I wanted to also say, it's instructive to also have your students attempt to make a game. And they're often very intimidated by this, and I'm intimidated by this, but there are quite a few tools that you can use nowadays to make games without knowing how to program. So there's Game Maker Studio, which is free, RenP, which is an interactive novel engine, and a lot of people use it to make terrible manga novels, but you could use that to make a game. This is Twine, which is an open source tool for telling interactive stories. And it's basically like a choose your own adventure online that you can make. And you really don't need to know how to program. All you need to do is be able to type, right? And sort of link pages together. And even something like Unity, which is actually an industry standard software development tool, has a free version that you can use that's very robust, and you can make kind of incredible things. And the challenge is to kind of build in the time for this. But I often say to people, you don't even need to get to this level. It's instructive to think about how objects have persuasive capacities or rhetorical qualities just at a paper and pencil level. So to have students prototype games just in their heads and on a whiteboard and on a piece of paper is just as valuable, right, as using this and having a more finished product, right? So maybe we can end with a little bit of PlayStation 3